Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time and have a collection of hundreds of monster ecology and strategy videos on my channel. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing as I upload at least twice a week. Today, as promised, I bring you a classic Dungeons & Dragons monster that you absolutely need to have in your game, the giant slug. So versatile. We actually have an encounter with one brought to us from the Tortle package, a former cleric of Umberlee now transformed into a 9-foot long and glistening black slug that has the same stats for the most part as the carrion crawler, with the exception of slower movement speed and some additional powers related to its former clerical life and the encounter location, but this will not suffice. First off, it's nowhere near as interesting as a giant slug should be. I've had some biological training, and my giant slugs have got a real nasty trick up their slimy sleeves. The carrion crawler is a great place to start for the stats of a giant slug, but that would be a pretty feeble giant slug, maybe a baby giant slug. I want something that's less of a dungeon speed bump and more of a decent, memorable challenge to the player characters that they're going to learn to respect. So let's take a look at the purple worm and the froghemoth as the baseline monsters to compare our stats to, and also a black dragon a few challenge ratings lower because their breath weapon is quite powerful. If we take a look at the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition Monstrous Manual, the giant slug is way bigger than 9 feet long. The smallest I've seen in an official source, which was the Dragon Magazine article from Dragon number 355 in 2007, gave their size as 14 feet long and weighing 12,000 pounds. In earlier sources, they range from 25 to 50 feet long when fully grown. They are huge to gargantuan, omnivorous mutations of the small and benign garden slugs. Their highly developed mouths are capable of chewing flesh as well as plants, and they spit a highly corrosive acid. Most giant slugs are pale grey with a dead white underbelly, and I prefer to just have the underground or cooler climate giant slugs that dull colour, while the more tropical versions, and particularly underwater versions, are bright and patterned with colours. For the ecology, the manual tells us that no one has ever found a good use for giant slugs, except maybe as huge garbage disposals. They have no known predators. They will eat anything, plants, carrion, garbage, anything if need be, but they prefer warm, living flesh when they can catch it. Since giant slugs have such huge appetites, they rarely attack smaller creatures such as squirrels and monkeys and such, which they have a hard time seeing anyway. Even on a good day, they must usually supplement their feedings with some vegetation. Normally, slugs have a nasty reaction to salt when it's sprinkled on them. They dry up and die in a few minutes. It's unlikely that this technique is adaptable to the giant variety, they're just too big, but some fabrication and summoning spells may be adaptable if there ever seemed to be a need for it. But giant slugs remain a very real danger to jungles, forests, and dungeons everywhere. I think it should be an option to include a vulnerability to salt. So a pound of salt thrown onto the snail skin may deal 1d6 acid damage to the creature. It may not. It's up to you as a dungeon master. This, as you will discover, can help the player characters more in a tactical sense than a destructive one, as they lay down big lines of salt that the giant slug recoils from in pain, as it takes a great deal of salt to actually bother a slug over 20 feet long. Giant slugs are also vulnerable to being immersed completely in water. Just a few minutes under the surface, particularly in salt water, is enough to kill them. Of course, this doesn't apply to the aquatic version of the giant lake or sea slug, but then they're far less formidable thanks to not having the giant slugs, the land version's fearsome acid attack, because an acid attack doesn't really work underwater. I created a monster listing for the giant slug in the homebrew archives of D&D Beyond, link in the description down below. The challenge rating is 10, and although the creature is listed as huge in size, when fully extended and moving along it is technically gargantuan in the amount of space it covers. But in combat it tends to bunch up its body and rear its head up to get a better view, protect its sensitive eye tentacles, and get the advantage of elevation for its acid attack. The slug can burrow through reasonably loose soil. It can't burrow through rock, and unless it can slam its weight into a wall, it can't knock it down. It can't go through these either. It has an armor class of 12, which is low because the thing is huge and not at all agile, but it is tough and rubbery, so it takes half damage from all bludgeoning attacks. It is also completely immune to acid. It has 14d12 plus 30, or between 44 and 198 with an average of 121 hit points, which I think accurately reflects that the mutation effects can be a bit random. You may want to give them all sorts of weird traits as well, such as a thick leathery mantle for additional armor class protection, or the ability of the frog behemoth to shoot out its sticky tongue and drag a victim into its grinding maw. Maybe even give it some eyeballs sprouting in odd places, and some blisters and things like that spout acid when it strikes, or you strike it. A bite attack of the giant slug is thanks to an organ called a radula, which is like a big tongue covered in thousands of razor-sharp fangs that can peel flesh off bone quite efficiently. It has 10-foot reach on the bite attack thanks to its size, is plus 10 to hit, and does 3d10 plus 6 piercing damage. Also, and this is one of the delightfully grotesque and weird parts of slug and nail mating habits, if a creature gets within 5 feet of the monster, it can shoot a harpoon-like chitinous spear into them, coated in exotic hormones, but not actually a vital part of the mating process. It's just one of the most aggressively frisky forms of foreplay in the animal kingdom, and makes for a real nasty attack that a player may not be expecting. This is a 5-foot reach attack to an adjacent target. It's plus 10 to hit and does 3d6 plus 9 piercing damage. It's also perfectly appropriate to include some sort of mutant toxin that poisons the target, and also the shooting dart is wickedly barbed and quite difficult to remove. The giant slug's most formidable attack, though, is its acid vomit. This recharges once used on a roll of 5 or 6 on a 6-sided die at the start of the slug's turn. It has a range of 30 feet and a cone, which covers a lot of spaces in the combat area. Anyone caught in that area must make a DC 16 dexterity saving throw or take the full brunt of 10d10 acid damage. Half that if they do manage to make the saving throw and get out of the way. Thankfully, the acid becomes inert fairly quickly once it's exposed to the air or water. Another thing I forgot to add to the monster listing is that the giant slug has advantage on all skill stealth checks, as it moves silently on its thick layer of slime and can blend into the terrain fairly well, most of the time. They do have a habit of moving through areas and openings that the prey would not expect them to be able to fit through, which enhances their chances of getting a surprise attack, and they certainly will not stop at sneaking up on prey that are asleep in a campsite, for instance. Giant slugs are not intelligent creatures. They'll most likely fight to the death, and they are too stupid to give up chasing after their prey. So once they get a taste or a scent of a potential meal, they will track it down relentlessly. Giant slugs will eat any creature in their path, and they don't make good riding mounts at all. They are hunted down and killed by most underground races, particularly the myconids, who are irresistibly delicious to giant slugs. Flail snails and giant slugs will most certainly try to kill each other, though a flail snail will most likely try to escape rather than get into combat. Don't forget, flail snails have the ability to rappel down chasms and sheer surfaces using a rope-like sticky strand. As the giant slug will have no problem killing and eating them, they will flee at the first chance. Likewise, you can tell a giant slug may be in the area if all the infestations of giant insects have vanished. The only exceptions which are off the giant slug's menu are carrion crawlers and all manner of oozes. Even though it's immune to acid, oozes just aren't palatable. Giant slugs don't really have an ecology per se, they are mutations, and unless they are, there's a few of them in the area with exactly the same sort of mutant characteristics, they can't reproduce. Even though they are hermaphrodites, they still need another giant slug to breed with, who is not sterile due to the mutation that grew them to such enormous proportions. Aside from being just one very nasty random encounter in a dungeon, swamp, dark forest floor, or cramped and disgusting city sewer, giant slugs can be a very good hook used to lure the characters into further adventures. What caused the mutation in the first place? Are there more of these things in the area? It may not be clear at first what the monster is, just gruesome scenes where livestock or bystanders have been murdered with tons of gore and a great big trail of slime on the ground, walls and ceilings. The characters may feel inclined to wait for the creature to reappear, perhaps use some livestock as bait, or they might follow the tracks and head right into an encounter location that better suits the giant slug's mode of locomotion. A giant slug may make a temporary lair for itself dug deep into a city garbage heap the size of a small hill. The combat will be tricky and slippery thanks to the terrain being gooey and full of garbage, slime pools, possible avalanches of noxious garbage, and the added fun of perhaps adding a curious and aggressive Otyugh to the fray. How about you skip the random encounter roll table, and next time the player character with the wild magic sorcerer sets off an incident, it's not external chaos, instead it transforms them for a limited time into a very confused and aggressive giant slug. The fact that other characters are faced with having to subdue the beast rather than just kill it makes for a very fun encounter, particularly if you hand over the monster entry for the giant slug to the player of the sorcerer and say to them, okay, go ahead and try to kill your friends. It will be one of the few times they roll a natural 20, look across the table and say sorry to their horrified friends, whose characters are getting their faces melted off as they fail to make saving throws. Fun times, fun critters. Please hit the like button if you made it this far, subscribe if you like what I do, check out my Patreon for some exclusive content and all the full scripts for these videos, buy some merchandise, wear your geek with pride, and as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.